Greetings, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have people in the UK, US, India, Asia, Singapore. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be talking about something which most people don't necessarily give too much thought on, and it's on two-factor authentication. One of the titles I did think about was, how do I make two-factor sexy? But, we stuck with this. Is your 2FA secure? The objective of today, I'm going to introduce the presenters. We have a specialist hacker who's going to join us a bit later. He's a good lad, but he's busy hacking right now. I'm just kidding. He's got some work to do. He'll be joining us very soon. But I also have Chris Payne. I'll introduce him. The objective of today is to share with you what you must consider before you renew your 2FA, or if you are considering buying 2FA. So welcome, everyone. The viewer count is going up, which is very, very good. And I'm going to dive straight in. Okay. The one on the left, the one with the blue turban, that's me. The guy in the middle, Naushad, he's wearing dark glasses. You can ask him why when you meet him. He's in the middle. He's the guy who's going to show us a bit more details about why some of the hacking, some of the 2FA methodologies are not good. He's a good serious hacker. He's a good friend. I know him very well. And on the right, Chris Payne. He will introduce himself. Over to you, Chris. Give a bit of introduction.
So yeah, good afternoon or maybe good morning to some of our other viewers. My name is Chris Payne. I'm a senior technical consultant for an organization in the UK, and for the past 6 years, one of my specialisms has become, at least anyway, two-factor authentication.
Excellent. So folks, a bit of hygiene. Switch off your phones. You know what I mean. If there's a fire alarm, don't run. Keep listening. Or actually save yourself, but you can always listen in. And if you have any questions, I like to make this interactive, so challenge us and agree with us. Also, hopefully, please do give us good feedback once you're over, once the webinar is over. Please do stay with us. Again, I know you can listen in, but if you do stay with us all the way till the end, or if you come back and listen in, there's some really exciting stuff we want to also share with you, and let you know what you're going to get. Okay. Something 2FA, two-factor authentication, but something you have, and I always try to say something you have with you always, rather than just something you have and you forget at home. And this is one of the alternative titles I was considering. But this is what we're going to cover, the problem. We're going to give you the hacker's view. Naushad will be joining us later, give you a couple of ideas on actually what to do. Many, many people have 2FA. This is just a quick summary. Many of you may already know what 2FA is, something you know, something you have, but actually a very high-level summary. And the techno folks who are really technical, I know I'm missing some bits in here, but please bear with me. The idea is basically you have a seed. So this is the image we found of a wonderful seed. You know what I mean? And if you do a bit of funky maths and some calculations, and you get a one-time password, often also called OTP. So a quick 1 second summary of what 2FA is. There's a lot more details at the back end, clock synchronization, etc., etc. Interestingly, we have some more information about another webinar we're going to do, which is very technical. But for now, this is a quick summary, and then we're going to move on into actually why it's insecure. 2FA, I mean, auditors love 2FA because it's a compliance thing. Are you selling or promoting responsible one? Okay, yeah. Well, actually, we're not actually selling anything. So thank you for asking, and whoever you are, thank you. But we're not actually selling anything. You can use whatever 2FA solution you want. What the objective of today's webinar is to share with you why some type of 2FA solutions are insecure and why some of them are secure and what to look out for. You do not have to buy anything at all. And I'm not actually a seller. So, you can look me up on LinkedIn and check out who I am. So coming back to this, 2FAs are used mainly for compliance, as I see a lot of them. Auditors love asking the question, is 2FA? Many compliance standards ask for 2FA two-factor authentication. The other thing that it's used for is to help people, or in many cases, by significant magnitude, but also to help people improve on their really bad habits of using regular passwords or easy to guess passwords. Okay, so 2FA is also used. I use it myself, and hopefully everyone on this chat uses some kind of 2FA. Would be good to know how many of you. If all of you say yes, that'd be very good. I use it on the personal and the corporate side, but it's a really good way to make unsafe passwords a bit more secure. Okay, and the other point on this is it is regularly used by many people, many organizations to protect key assets. But the fundamental reason we are here, folks, is to discuss, is 2FA secure, and which kind of 2FA solutions. I'm not going to mention any vendor for the folks who have highlighted this, just one individual, but this is about discussing why 2FA is secure or not, and which kind of 2FA is something that you should consider if you are going to renew your license or if you are going out to get one. Okay, so I'm going to be interrupting Chris Payne. He's going to give you his expert opinion. And Chris, obviously, you're going to take over from now. Just let the users know your experience in terms of how many of you've been doing installations and consultancy on 2FA, and then let's dive in straight into the rest of the presentation. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. And so I've I guess in previous careers, I have also worked with 2FA solutions, so I am both an implementer and user. And of course, I think the banking industry has done a great job of educating us all about 2FA over the past sort of 3 to 4 years. I don't think you'll find many bank accounts out there now that don't have some kind of a token entry to get into the online portal. So it's not something that we're not used to anymore. We do all have a slight grasp of what it involves. And I just want to go back to some of the slides that Amar was showing previously. What I tend to find in my career as an implementer of 2FAs, there tends to be two main drivers for 2FA implementations, and one of them is auditing. You'd be surprised at how many people go out there looking for 2FA solutions purely because they got a cross in the box for 2FA, which is great. We're spreading a message of security, but at the same time, there needs to be something beyond that idea of compliance. People need to actually understand why they're implementing this. Now, for those who are maybe a little bit more enlightened on the subject, we know that it adds that additional layer of security, and in particular, it takes away some of the hassle that we have with bad user passwords. So with 2FA, because it's essentially a randomized 6 to 8-digit code, anybody that chooses a bad password, which administrators have been fighting with since the dawn of time in IT, which is probably 20 years, we're able to get rid of those old habits and just say, well, fine, have those terrible passwords if you really like, because we're going to add that randomized element to things anyway. So that tends to be the two main reasons. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect key assets within the organization. And if you think about the way that it works when you're inside of your organization, when you're sitting at your desk and you're working on your internal applications, there tends to be a username and a password prompt, but you've afforded all that protection of the firewall and the AV and the laptop that you're using. That IT team is well funded, we hope at least, and it's protecting everything. But when you're on the outside world and you're expecting that same experience, we need to protect that too. So that tends to be the main drivers when it comes towards why 2FA is implemented. Now, 2FA really, and this is something that I guess has happened again fairly recently, is 2FA has really been split into two areas, hardware tokens and software tokens. And again, people will probably be very familiar with that. Most banking applications, I guess, will use something like a hardware token. It's easy to distribute. And then software tokens, you'll probably see more likely on things like Gmail, Microsoft Office 365, things like that. They prefer that electronic route using things like software tokens. And there are negatives and positives to both of those, which we'll explore in a bit more detail.
So, Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Before we, a good question. Your question, someone pointed out, your question seems too narrow. 2FA only works when it is used. I couldn't agree more. That is an issue. Often it's not because it's too slow. Often is because it's too slow or hard. Most banks do not use 2FA to get into the login. They only use it for transactions. Yes, I don't disagree. I mean, you didn't put a name, so I can't really call you out. But thank you for the point. It's a good point, and this is one of the things we are going to discuss. It's actually a solution or an approach is only as secure as how much adoption you get from the end users. If they really despise using 2FA because it's onerous, it's a bit slow, then it's really not presenting any value. So yeah, I mean, do keep us engaged on this. We're trying to make it as interactive as possible. And thanks for the point. Over to you, Chris.
No, absolutely, and maybe just to answer that point, I'm not obviously familiar with every single banking application out there, but my bank in particular, so that belongs to the HSBC group, they use a token for logging in. And they also use the same token for transactions. So they actually use it at both points, whereas I know somebody like NatWest, for example, only use it at the point of transaction. But what they're actually protecting is money moving from the account. And in both scenarios, you could possibly end up with something like that happening. So, it's still a case of identification, authentication. So it could be used at either point, really. So we're talking about some of the issues that you can have with some of the providers out there, some of the limitations around some of the choices in 2FA applications. And one of the points that I wanted to highlight, which is actually probably one of my favorite discussion points because it's a little bit weird, is 1.5 FA. And most people won't necessarily be familiar with this. It's almost a play on words. What is 1.5 factors of authentication? You've got something you know and something you are, or something that you own, you possess. And surely those all constitute full numbers, right? 1, 2, or 3. But what we've actually seen in some cases is a desire to want to put the token into the same portal that you're logging into. And here's a great example of that. It's actually nothing to do with Juniper. We're not picking on Juniper here. It's just a screenshot we happen to have found. But we have seen in some instances the token is actually presented in the browser or in the application. And really that breaks the whole idea of something you know and something you own, because the owning part can't really be defined properly. Now, most auditors out there will agree that 1.5, this is what constitutes 1.5 authentication factors, and you'll normally get a cross in the box for that. And that's a pretty universal answer for most auditors. So I would definitely say if that's something that you're coming across in your solution, that should be taken away immediately.
So Chris, sorry to interrupt you. In a nutshell, avoid 1.5 FA. It's not actually a true 2 FA, yeah?
It's a little bit lazy, I think, and what it comes back to is absolutely lazy FA. It's great. What it really comes down to is the planning aspect when putting something like this in place. You need to make sure that whatever things that you're trying to avoid, whatever things that you're putting in place to try and make it easier for your users, it still has to constitute 2 factors of authentication in the end.
Excellent. So, what's the Turing method?
Well, the Turing method is kind of taking 1.5 FA and making it look sexier, or at least making it look more appealing to get away from the fact that it's 1.5 factors of authentication. So if anyone hasn't figured it out already, Turing is reference to Alan Turing, the famous World War II cracker. And what he did was to obviously decode any of the cryptexts that were coming across from Nazi Germany at the time. And we have a very similar method for the Turing method when it comes to 2FA. So what would normally happen is the user would be aware of a static pin. Let's say my pin was 1, 2, 3, 4. This code would be displayed to me on the screen that we're looking into, and I would choose characters 1, 2, 3, and 4. So my 2FA would be 5, 7, 2, and 4, and that would constantly change, and therefore that represents that changing 2FA factor. Now that's great, and it looks really good on presentations, but the problem with that is it can be reverse engineered, and Google actually did a really great piece on this themselves to prove that it can be reverse engineered. You can derive the PIN from just using a bot to look at that number sequence. Now, this might look familiar to some people. I don't know if you've seen captcha codes, and you might have noticed in the past few years, captcha codes have changed ever so slightly. It used to be write this letter down and it's hidden behind a tree and it's got a line through it and it's a bit blue, and you couldn't figure out if that was a 1 or a lowercase L, and you'd have to do about 5 times before you could get in. Well, Google actually proved that they could break their own captcha code system using a bot. And what you may have noticed is more recently you'll see captcha codes where you just tick a check button instead, because they found the system can be obfuscated. And it's exactly the same in the scenario here.
So I'm not sure how many of you are happy to admit, but I must admit several years ago, probably what I call a cyber century ago, when I was still alive, I actually thought the Turing method was a very cool authentication method. It looks cool. It like, wow, they're really secure. But whoever is listening in and knows me, this was several, probably a decade or more ago, whenever it started. For a few minutes and seconds or days, I did think, wow, this is really cool. But then, as you say, the headache is this is not necessarily a one-time. In fact, it's not a true one-time password generation, is it?
No, it's not. Well, in fact, yes, it kind of is, but the point is it can be reverse engineered. So once that happens, you've completely given up the whole point of having a static pin and having this cool, funky-looking screen where you have to derive a passcode from it. What I would say is where the Turing method tends to become popular is in situations where people don't want to buy hardware tokens because there's an initial outlay for that, and there's a lot of people out there that don't want that expense. But on the other hand, they don't want to use something like a mobile phone because they don't trust their users to be able to sign up to the solution properly. So they go for this half ground, which is this Turing method, but then it goes for an audit and they fail.
So, Chris, I just wanted to cover a couple of more questions, which is good. Highly encourage the audience to keep them coming in. So, first one, do you consider the SMS sent from a bank, the SMS text message to validate a transaction as 2FA? Because if you use an Apple mobile phone, you can get your text message. Yeah, we're going to actually cover that. Good point. So maybe it's 1.6 or 1.3 FA. Whoever, again, no names, so I can't call you out. Thank you. We will cover that. Biometrics to 1.5 FA is a question. Are biometrics 1.5 FA something you know plus something you are, but which can be bypassed with something else you know? Or you could just, in fact, in Malaysia, whoever has been to Malaysia, there was many years ago when one of the funky car manufacturers came out with thumbprint. He had a really expensive Mercedes, and they just took his thumb and ran away with the car. So we'll cover that. It's a good question. Are biometrics 1.5 FA? Chris, do you have any comments on that, or do you want to come back to that?
No, I think the spirit of biometrics are that it should be 2FA. It is something you are, and hopefully you're logging in with some kind of credential, which is the element of what you know. But where it could become a problem is exactly here. The key word is bypassed. So if there's some kind of issue with reading your fingerprint, and anyone that's got an iPhone knows sometimes that doesn't work, and you've got to type in your PIN number. That would essentially no longer constitute 2FA. You're bypassing the biometric part, and you're entering something else that you know. But the key word here is bypass. So we're not saying that 2FA has been completely removed from the scenario. It's bypassed in a situation where it couldn't be used. And I think that most good systems out there would only allow you to bypass a certain number of times. And there may even be some additional security there, such as geographic location checks and things like that.
So I mean, I'm going to throw the acronym in. MFA, multi-factor authentication, is definitely becoming much more common. So we all need to start considering not just 2FA, but actually MFA, depending on where you are, what time it is, etc., etc. Contextual factor authentication also. Wow, we could go on and on. So, Chris, what's the screen here? Is that something that people used to use some time ago? I haven't seen this for a while.
Well, I was just going to say as well, we could talk about this forever, and it's probably why it's one of my favorite subjects. So the screen that you can see right now is a screenshot from a Citrix NetScaler. Again, we're not saying that Citrix NetScalers are insecure. We've just tried to use a cross-section of products in our screenshots. But more importantly, what you can see is an injected part of that page from a 2FA provider, and probably a bit reluctant to name them, but I'm sure anybody who's seen that before knows who they are. Is it old? No, it is still out there. You can still purchase that today.
Excellent. Okay, I know there are a couple of more questions coming in. There's quite a lot of material to cover. We'll come back to the questions. So hardware token, let's look at that first, because I really have never liked them because I never could keep them with me, but over to you.
Yeah, well, hardware tokens are not necessarily my favorite either, and I would say that the majority of 2FA implementations that I've done over the years has either been swapping them out or reducing them significantly.
Can we just ask the audience from it's close to 100 now, whoever actually still loves hardware tokens and or uses them, please could you say I use them or I like them? That'd be good. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no problem at all. So there are some inherent security risks with hardware tokens, and it really goes back to the idea of the seed. Now this is quite a complex topic to cover, so bear with me as I try and describe it. Do you want to move on to the next slide, Amar?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So you would have seen this slide earlier on in the presentation, but just to go over what it is, with any 2FA solution, there is a calculation that's taking place. And as Amar says, it is far more complicated, and there's probably a webinar follow-up to this which will go into it in more detail. But for the basics of what we need to cover, what is essentially happening is you've got a seed file, and that's at least how it's referred to, and that's the random element in this token. So that's what makes it unique. And you calculate using a mathematical algorithm and that seed file implanted into it, you calculate a token, which you can see on the left-hand side. Now, it's very much, you can actually think of it like cryptography. Cryptography has a known calculation, RSA, something like that, but then you inject a key into it to make it random for your particular instance. Now, 2FA tokens out there usually follow a standard called OATH, that's OATH, and of course the key is then produced by the manufacturer, so that's to their standard, that's something that's unique to them.
Excellent. Now, so just a quick summary, many of them still use them, interestingly. One individual said, I used to use them, as in the past. In one individual, no name again, sadly, still likes them. Excellent. One more question. Would you consider a smart card a hard token? That's a good question. Chris?
Well, actually, that's a really good question. I would say yes, but I understand the counter argument would be that usually there's some software on the chip of the card itself, which usually calculates the token. So I guess it's one token that I hadn't really thought of that sits in a bit of a grey area. But I would say for the most part, at least for the disadvantages of hardware tokens, it probably sits within the hard token camp.
Okay, let's take I'd love to make this interactive for the audience out there. Feel free to say, is smart card a hard token or 1.5 token or soft token? I repeat the question, folks. Is a smart card that generates the same number a hard token or a soft token? One more question. I disagree with behavioral, geofence, etc., because these are only necessary when your 2FA is rubbish and they have high false positive. I couldn't agree in some cases. You could be in China or not, but your 2FA may stop working. Changing to a working 2FA is better than augmenting broken 2FA with privacy invasive MFA ideas. Again, I can't really call you out, but whoever has made this point, it's a very, very good point. Some of the MFA contextual issues, no doubt, have privacy-related headaches, and they may not be necessarily secure. They're just an additional layer, maybe not even factor. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Chris. Next one, over to you, sir.
Absolutely. So if we're talking about that subject around seed files, then what we have to consider is where is that seed file made and where does it actually reside after that token's been distributed to its end customer or the people that's using that token. And that's really the key question when it comes down to hardware tokens. At point of manufacture, the token is implanted into the into the token. The token is then distributed in a box of other tokens to a distributor, which then goes down to a reseller that gets broken down and sent into a customer's environment. And usually you have a CD or a USB stick or something like that that follows that token, which includes those seed files for you to inject into your solution so that they're calculating the same token. Now, the issue with that comes with where is that seed file before in that chain? Where is it afterwards once you're using it? Is it secure? And can you guarantee its safety as a result? And quite rightly, as this slide highlights, the seed that's on that token remains static throughout its entire lifetime. And so we need to ask the question, where is this seed file? And many manufacturers out there keep them at least for 6 months and in some cases indefinitely.
Okay, again, no name. Someone's made a point. Smart card question is not the right way to think. You should examine efficacy. Again, I couldn't agree more. Is it a good authentication 2FA solution or not? Rather than is smart card a good, 2FA as I asked earlier. I will count smart card as hard tokens and as physical attributes and needs handling care. Okay, thank you, Vivek. That's good. Why? Okay, keep the questions coming in. Thank you, and your points. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, Chris, over to you. Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the whole point that I was raising there about hardware tokens and seeds and the protection of seeds and where are they once they've been delivered to the customer really got highlighted back in 2011. And most people are aware of this case, but not necessarily aware of the specifics. And we all saw that it was RSA were hacked. Most people are aware of that. It was featured in many a presentation. But what most people didn't realize was that after that, they replaced thousands of tokens for high-profile customers. And the question you have to ask yourself is why? And the reason for that, essentially, well, at least you can deduce it, is that the seed files have been compromised for those devices. So one of those customers was Lockheed Martin. Sure everybody's familiar with that name, producer of military equipment, arms, engines, things like that. They were actually breached directly as a result of those seed files going missing. So not only did somebody get a hold of those seed files, but they actively used them in an attack against probably one of the most high-profile targets you could.
One piece of advice for those who don't know about this, please do take a few moments and half an hour, read on the RSA hack and read up on the Lockheed hack. It's good knowledge. It's good historical. It was quite an interesting moment. Especially, I'm sure many of the audience may have been also had to replace hardware tokens. I was working somewhere where I remember we had to replace all the hardware tokens. It was a very costly and operationally painful affair.
Absolutely. Operationally, definitely. I mean, if you think about most larger organizations, you've got users in multiple geographic locations. You've got to ship all those tokens out, make sure you send them to the right people. You've also got to factor in that at least not a significant portion, but a portion of them at least probably will go missing, get damaged, arrive in a state that you didn't expect them to. So operationally, this kind of change is a real big deal.
Okay, a couple of questions coming in, Chris. How do you feel about biometrics and privacy in regards to the business? Yes, biometrics, geofencing, massive privacy issues. For those who are dialing in from the UK, Europe, you may have heard of the four-letter word, starts with G, ends with R, GDPR, massive issues. So for the record, I'm not saying you must use geofencing or biometrics. We are discussing different factors, if I may, different levels and factors of what people are using currently. But yes, it is definitely a privacy issue, not easy to get around. What about storage, destruction of all the data that you're collecting? Quick one, I've seen both. Sorry.
It's a completely different point and maybe on the tangent, but I think considering the day and the age that we live in, it is worth just mentioning on that point. Mm-hmm. I think that GDPR specifically is going to cause a little bit of a hit in the uptake of biometric data being used for authentication, because naturally you're going to look at a solution for biometric authentication and then it's going to be bundled with all this additional privacy that you're going to have to take into account. I mean, yes, people should have done it ethically before, but now they're going to be forced to legislatively, which is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, okay, I'm reading everything else that's coming in. Your biometrics are static. Are they 1.5 then? Fair point. I wish we had a bit more time. We can discuss this. There's quite a lot more we have to cover. If smart cards are hard tokens, then I love them. Okay, excellent. Why smart card is better than RSA? I think we did cover it, but I've got to park this. I do apologize. I have seen both hardware and software tokens being used for remote logins. Okay, that's a good one. Thank you. So, yes, sorry, Chris. Moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. So outside of the security issue around the seeds, there's also the operational headaches as well. So, for example, these devices contain batteries, so they will normally need replacing between 2 and 3 years, 4 if you're very lucky. They often get broken. They get trodden on, they get thrown in the bin, somebody, I don't know, sits on them on the train or drops them out the car window, dog eats it, who knows, but quite often these things do get damaged. I've seen many an environment that has to suffer with that headache. In fact, I've seen sometimes a person's job entirely dedicated to replacing broken tokens in an organization.
Listen, if I could put my photo up there, that's probably the case I used to have when I used to figure out, really, where is my token? No,
And
seriously,
it raises,
I mean, hopefully the listeners also can relate to this, but hardware tokens have a major issue, and the image on the left is a YubiKey. If you haven't heard about it, folks, do check it out. And what is a bit depressing to me is the fact that folks are still saying YubiKey is a really good way. Yes, as long as you have it with you. And how many people leave their USB keys plugged in was my issue when I saw this. And most people are now moving towards USB-C. You know, I don't know. I'll leave it to you and the audience.
Well, YubiKey is a good idea, but as I say, I think the biggest challenge they have is most people will buy the smaller one, the one that almost looks like a Bluetooth dongle, and they just leave it hanging out of the USB port, which means anybody that knows what a YubiKey is, they'll just come along and push it. And that's a little bit of a limitation of it, but also, you know, particularly this quote that you've got here, you know, where is my hardware token? Did I leave it at home? It raises a really good question, because in between using that token, where on earth is it? Who's got access to it? Has it, you know, what's happening to this device in the time that I'm not using it? There's a significant amount of people out there that maybe use a token once every week, maybe once every 2 weeks. What's happening to it in between that time frame? Has it been lost and we're not reporting it until the time that we need to log into something?
So, Chris, I'm going to ask you a question before I move on. In your opinion, and again, the audience is more than happy to agree and disagree, is it recommended to consider, I mean, nothing is binary. There is no binary answer, I admit. Should we consider stop using hardware-based tokens?
Well, I think it ultimately comes down to risk, really. And I would say that there are still a cohort of people out there that would prefer to use hardware tokens, and they do sometimes have legitimate reasons behind it. You know, sometimes it just makes sense for people to be able to distribute hardware tokens and not have to ask users to install apps or do anything like that. There is a portion of people out there. I personally think that the future is really only there for software tokens, but as I say, they're still selling them.
And if you imagine that seed always being in the hardware token, I've got an interesting comment here. Misplaced tokens are more serious than we are playing, which is fine. It makes the help desk accustomed to allowing bypasses. An amazingly good point. Thank you again, but I can't call out your name. They are therefore much more likely to accidentally commit maybe a social engineering attack. This is actually a really good point, because I have done this in the past, part of the ethical hacking, but also just literally part of getting my job done. I couldn't find my key, and I called in help desk. I begged them, I threatened them, and I begged them again. Probably bought them coffee 100 times, and they did bypass 2FA, whether it was for a few hours, but there was a bypass. So it's not really the whole issue about hardware tokens and forgetting them is actually quite a serious issue. Okay, thank you to whoever made that point. Thank you. Another one, 2FA with biometric has its own disadvantage. Vivek says lower acceptance as individuals. Yes, intrusive, 100%. Thank you, Vivek. Hardware, what is a smartphone or feature phone if not a hardware token? Again, yes. I wish we had more time to discuss that, but we're going to move on to actually that point. I can't call out your name because no name. Okay. Sorry, Chris. Software.
Yeah, so I guess that's a very good, whoever raised that point has actually seemed to have raised it perfectly at the right time in the webinar. The idea of a software token, I guess, is in some respects an abstract concept, because it has to sit on some form of hardware anyway for it to be displayed to you. Really, I guess what we're getting at when we're talking about hardware versus software tokens is purely about this idea of who owns that device and also where the seed file is generated and kept.
Go on, I'm moving on. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. Okay, so yeah, with software token, there's a difference with the way that seeds are generated. Now, most software providers out there, the seed is actually transferred to the device and generated at the point that that device wants to acquire that seed file. So the manufacturer is not predetermining it. It's something that's happening on your site, in your organization, and therefore that seed is up to you to protect, and the risk is for you to bear. So that, you know, what we've not got there is if a hardware provider gets hacked and loses your seeds, well, you need some new hardware devices. If a software provider gets hacked and they can't lose any seeds, you're still afforded the protection of the fact that your seeds are held internally. So most software providers out there, what they'll basically do is for you to acquire a seed on, say, a mobile phone app, is you'll be opening that app on the device and scanning a QR code, and that QR code is an encoded version of the seed file. And that's generally how it works. Now, there's something that really needs to be paid attention to in this process, and that's a final step in this whole workflow, and that is when you scan that QR code and you absorb that seed file, any good software application out there should give you a corresponding code on the screen of that smartphone to type back into your enrollment portal. And it's a really key point, which actually some other providers out there don't do. If you don't do that, it's completely plausible that you could take a screenshot of that QR code and enroll as many devices as you want. You could just go out there and enroll 100 smartphones. Somebody could take a screenshot if your machine's been infected somehow, take a screenshot and enroll an extra device somewhere else and start logging in as you, as long as they've got your password. So that idea of copy protection is really critical to a good software token. And there is one very large player out there that doesn't do this in particular. Amar, are we allowed to mention who it is? What do you think?
Go on.
All right, okay, so a bit of anticipation there. So if anybody is a user of Office 365 or I guess any of the Microsoft packages really, you may have noticed that Microsoft's MFA solution doesn't have that final step in it. So it's really key that people have to realize those types of free 2FA solutions, there are things that are disadvantages to them, and this is often the case.
Okay, I want to make a point, cover a couple of things. We are running out of time. Sadly, BrightTalk has a habit of literally disconnecting in 60 minutes. If you were to lose your hardware token, would it count as a data breach in the eye of GDPR? Very good question. Maybe we could discuss this later. Going back to the RSA hack, were the seeds for hardware or software tokens? I think it is for the hardware because that was some time ago. Software tokens were not that popular at that time. All seeds sit in the same server database as user passwords. One provider breach leaks everything at once. I'm not sure what that means, but I think I can see where you're getting at. But we've got to move on because there's quite a lot of other stuff. I wanted to share this with you. If you haven't heard about it, really interesting. You can talk about it when you do your presentations. But in a nutshell, you can check this out. Verizon did some checking. They found some anomalous activity. And there was a connection from China every day, 9 to 5. And they basically discovered that a developer had outsourced his work. And they then asked him, saying, dude, where's your RSA token, right? The hardware one. And he just gave a very straightforward answer. He had shipped it over to China. Okay? So it brings the reality home that this could be happening right now with your developers, with outsourced developers. And his code was actually really, really good. He was getting signed off very good. So if you have a moment, go and check this story out and fall off laughing off the table because it's really funny and scary at the same time. And I think going back to what Chris was talking about, the copy protection, right now, I think Google has just changed it, correct, Chris? Google,
that's right, yeah.
Yeah?
I think it was a couple
Google
of
has
weeks
just
back.
changed this, but you could do the same. As long as you had a copy of the QR code, you could, in theory and practice, get the same QR code running on multiple one-time password codes on your software. Over to you, Chris. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth me answering that last question that we got, which is about the idea of the seed sitting on the same server as the user passwords. Actually, in reality, that's not the case. So normally with a 2FA solution, you pair it with a directory system. So I think for 99% of the world out there, that's going to be Active Directory. So you'll have Active Directory storing and managing your user passwords, and usually a 2FA solution would, although albeit linked to the directory server, would normally sit separately. So it would store authentication details for that user separately. So there would be a degree of separation between them.
Okay, what is nomophobia?
Nomophobia. Okay, so I'm pretty sure nobody's heard of this. In fact, I guess
anybody else heard of this? Very quickly before we move on to the next slide. Anybody, your chance to say yes.
We'll let people try and guess what it is as I describe it, but I think I may have even introduced you to this concept, Amar. We've obviously spoken about this previously. So nomophobia is another one of those diseases out there. I think they come up with a new one every day, but it's actually a condition. Sorry, it's the human condition of needing to be near their telephone all the time. And we're not alien to this concept. You do see this happening. You go on a train and everybody's looking at their phone. You leave the house in the morning, or maybe the afternoon if you're a millennial, and you know which pocket you've got your mobile phone in, and if it's not there, you know it and you run back in the house. And of course, if you lose your mobile phone, you report it straight away and you get a replacement very, very quickly. So nomophobia is this whole idea of the fact that you cannot be separated from your phone. It's almost become an extension of our bodies. Now, people are probably thinking, why on earth are we talking about this concept? But there's a really important thing to think about here. If the token is on an app, on somebody's mobile phone, you naturally inherit the security of that user being paranoid about losing that device. And that's completely different from a hardware device. People ignore them. They only go and find them when they need them. That smartphone is in front of you right now. I mean, mine is in front of me. I know where it is. If it gets lost, I'm going to go find it. If I can't find it, I'm going to get it replaced and cancelled straight away. Those are features that you just don't get from people when they're using a hardware token.
I'm going to have to ask the audience here, how many people can live without their phone for a day? We keep answering that question because I really can't live without my phone, not just because of the software authentication tokens I use, but because I just have to live everything. I don't use my telephone line. So yeah, I probably have nomophobia. I don't make that kind of a face, but if you imagine being me with the turban, I do say something similar. So for folks listening in, oh, where's my phone? So listen, we have Naushad. He's finished hacking whoever he had to. I'm just kidding.
No.
He's a good hacker. Naushad, thank you for joining in, folks. And we're going to try to do this, obviously, very quickly. Naushad he's not going to give you too much information of what he does because some of it is, confidential. But I know he's a good lad, and he is very, very technical, and he does a lot of actual hacking. And for the record, hackers are not bad. Hackers can be malicious, and hackers can be good. So Naushad is on the good side of the hacking community, folks. So Naushad, I'm going to move the slides for you, if you don't mind. But we'll start with the call. We were discussing iPhones, but then we wanted to talk about, and I'm sorry to break it to the audience. If you're using Android, I'll let you answer it.
Oh, you were talking about iPhone now, huh? So, and the reason why I don't want to talk about Android is because it itself, the infrastructure itself is it can't be stand alone. So when you talk about security, so I don't want to talk about Android. Android is not the right solution for security purpose, for business purpose. So that's why I wanted to say that I don't want to talk about anything. It's a wasting time, and let's talk about the real security. And that's
okay. So Naushad, what you're
Hmm?
trying to say, if I'm correct, please, that image that you have, the beautiful image of a broken,
building.
Insecure building, is basically you could have a really great sofa in there, right?
Yeah.
With a really great blanket, and the building could fall on you. I like the analogy. So the whole building, the breaking building, is Android. So you could have a really, really secure solution, 2FA or whatever secure solution, but if you're using Android, we don't want to talk too much about it, but you really need to consider not using Android unless you have it secure to an art. Moving on.
That's absolutely, that's my point of view. Yeah, and the second thing to take away is don't use continuity on the phone. So if you're a business person looking for a professional way, and don't use the continuity, because as a hacker's point of view, I have come across lots of issues that I'm seeing day to day, day in, day out, where I can exploit certain things that people buy these simple stuff, doing social engineering to get the things done. Like I told you, like I said, I did last time when I talked to Amar, I was saying how I can social engineering and get you a two-factor authentication password. And that is not the right way to do that, because I know it's a pain in the ass sometimes to have individual logins and individual this, but the hackers, the black hat people, they like continuity. The more you get the easier drive, the more easier for them to get easier to hack into certain things, because you have to make a one mistake for them to get advantage over you. So I would emphasize for people to don't use the continuity unless if it's a personal, fine. If it's a business related, I would say the board level avoid it. Because
okay, so continuity for those who don't know continuity, very simple. If Naushad sends me a text message or iMessage, I will see that message on multiple devices all at the same time. Okay? Even if that device is no longer with me, as long as if I haven't disabled it, that message will show up on that other device wherever it is on the planet. Okay? So, Naushad, if I'm correct, Naushad, what we are trying to say here is, if you don't need continuity and you need more security, disable continuity. Okay?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so next point, sir. Oh, sorry, I'm moving too fast. Yeah. Why you should stop using text for two-factor authentication?
Let me give you one of the examples, because the text is one of the easiest way to cross-feeding the text, and one of the easiest way to do social engineering and getting the attack. For example, I can go to your Google business account or whatever account. I don't want to give any name particularly. Go to the account, and then I can reset your password. And first thing, what they're going to do to you, they're going to send it to owner of the account owner. A 6 or 8 digit number, right? So I can pretend to send from a message. You can see if you do the closer look on the screenshot, you'll see I'm pretending to be sending from a Google and saying some unauthorized activities going on in your account. Please, can you verify the text message? We have sent it to you. What the customer did is he sent me back the 8 digits. So what I did is, after taking the message, and I reset the password. So here you go. I get into his crown jewel. That's what I wanted to show you.
Sorry. Hold on one second. So you send
Sorry, I'm too fast.
So you send the customer a message.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
First, let's go step by step.
Okay.
First, I went to your Gmail account.
Okay.
Let's say your two-factor authentication, and I tried to reset your password. You tried to log in your password, fake password, using fake password, and then I clicked the send me the verification number, and it automatically sent a 8-digit number to your phone, the original phone owner.
The original phone and the original message.
Yeah, original message.
From Google.
So when you from the Google, send you a 8-digit number.
Yeah.
So next step, what I have to do it, I have to pretend to be a Google guy and send a text message to you saying, we are noticed some unauthorized activities in your account. Please verify you are the actual account holder, and reply with your text message you have received.
I understand. Okay.
Now you will send me back the code, which Google sent to you.
Google has sent you. Yes.
That's the only things I needed to get into your account.
Okay, I have a question for you, Naushad. What if the customer is using OTP code for Google? Yeah.
That is also have OTP code, meaning is just like time-based, password generation, and that is one of the secure way to use it, but it still does also have some flaws using that, or HOTP user counter increasing the systems each time when the message is created. But you see, anything when you start using the application-based or two-factor authentication from the start of few months, 6 months, is secure at best, right? Until there's somebody else breaking. Yes?
I understand. So what about why you should stop using text for two-factor authentication? We're still on this topic. Yeah.
I emphasize anybody, business or personal, do not use any text-based authentication. Just cancel it. You don't need that. You rather go for application-based or two-factor authentication, different mechanism. Use a UBT or something like that. Even though I know you will lose it, you'll get, but you have to be a bit more intelligent enough.
So avoid text-based authentication. Yeah. And are you going to tell us why? I'm going to show the next screen. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us what you do. Oh, this is the password manager. What are your thoughts on password managers generating one password? Go on.
I really hate using password managers because password managers is like everything inside. You just have to crack one password, right? It's like I love when I get the task, somebody giving me task to do crack password managers. I love cracking password managers. As soon as you get when I do countless of red teaming. When I do red teaming and when I saw people using, I don't want to name anything, password one or LastPass. I don't want to name any company for certain reason. I'm not going to be sued. You're going to be sued. So I mean, I love.
Yeah, I think if I may, Naushad, I think what you are trying to say, because I use password manager, what you are trying to say is you're putting all your passwords in one basket. So it better be a really strong authentication mechanism, right?
Absolutely.
I don't disagree.
I emphasize, a few points to take away. I'll give you some of the few points to take away. This is next slide now. Two-factor authentication message encryption call video. Yeah, this is one of the tower I have created to multiple purpose of this tower. I made it for testing purpose, which is really needed. This tower is, I call them a fake cell tower. If you walk around your buildings, you will see number of fake towers, and you don't even know where they come from. If I can make a tower, the fake shell towers, fake shell tower, what they intend to do is one of the intentions to do that is to scan, pretend to be a doctor or pretend to be a legitimate tower, and you can cross over from legitimate tower to your machine, your tower, to transfer the bandwidth or whatever transaction going through, and then from here you just have to install a Wireshark or other tools to intercept the transactions between the towers. So
can I de-simplify this? What you're saying is, in the previous slide, I'm going to go back very quickly. You've built this in cell tower, and what we are saying is, going back to text message authentication, you can very, very easily intercept the SMS message if you're obviously within range to compromise the SMS message without doing any kind of social hacking.
Yeah, actually, if you go back to previous one, the one I built it for IoT, Internet of Trouble. I built this one for IoT, Internet of Trouble, and then by accidentally, what happened was suddenly I started getting the request from neighboring tower because they have two hi-fi systems there, and then a request from that they asking to ping my system, and it was naturally happen. So I say allowed it. Let me see what's worth can come. Soon as I started seeing this TCP dump, tons of millions of TCP dumps started pouring into my system. The thing I had is sitting down and the phishing the stuff.
Okay, listen, I've got a couple of questions. What if the password manager is behind 2FA with a hard token? Question for you.
Yeah, it's quite.
Go on, Naushad. You've got to encourage people to use passwords. Otherwise, everyone is going to write them down. Come on.
Oh, you know what? I encourage people to write them down. Honestly.
Okay. Stop.
A few things. Sure, you have to use a password manager, but always use the password. I'm not completely saying don't use the manager, because I personally do use myself because it helped you. It helped you. But as a hacker's point of view, you need to think about it. You don't want to make them easier. So when you make a password, it's still we are living 20 years. Password 1 to password 3, we went to 20 years. Few points to take away. Think about how many of us use between the password spaces. Do anybody know about?
So listen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Sorry. So I would say, and personally, I would say use a good password manager. Use common sense. Use a very good, strong password. And if possible, obviously, connect it to a proper 2FA solution. So I would say it is better, Okay.
Yeah. Let me give you.
Agree.
I agree. Let me give you a few points to take away regarding the password creating. Don't choose a password is very hard for you. Make it easy for you to remember, but hard for the machine to detect. How can you achieve the multi-word password? So easy for you, but hard for machine to remember multi-word password. And
so what I say. What I say to that is normally is easy to remember, difficult to guess. Yeah.
That's it. Machine to remember.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, easy for human to remember. So if you remembered 4 or 5 words, you know,
Yeah.
you could say
Yeah.
Naushad, Amar,
I love my
TFA,
wife.
or whatever. That's up to you, Naushad. But
Yeah.
that is, with a space or something.
Yeah.
That's you know, in many more cases more secure than trying to remember password 123 with an exclamation mark. Okay, Naushad, we got too many other questions coming in, and we're running out of time. But listen, first of all, I wanted to thank you also. Chris, there are a couple of questions you wanted to answer. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. And I was just going to say there on the topic of writing passwords down. I think it was my uncle Amar that told me every time you write a password down, an auditor dies somewhere. So we probably shouldn't be doing that. But,
No. When I do password writing, I write down at least 4 different ways, 4 different languages.
No, absolutely not.
I'm lucky
just
to have
around there.
Yeah, I'm lucky to have known as 4 different 5 languages. So.
And just the next point I was going to make, I think actually our audience seems to be actually answering the question themselves here. You're absolutely right. It really comes down to the difference between passphrase and password, and that kind of capitalized on Amar's point, doesn't it? Difficult to guess, but easy to remember. Passphrase is always helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there were a couple of questions that came up while we were watching the final part of the presentation that I wanted to go back on. Somebody asked the question around GDPR. They said that if you lose a 2FA token, is that a breach under GDPR? The answer is no, because a token doesn't constitute personal information. So it's more about what could be achieved after losing that token, but it's not really of relevance to the token itself.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
And the other question that we had, and obviously aware of the time, so I'll cover it very quickly. Somebody asked about the secure elements of a phone. Now, you might not be familiar, but there's something in the iPhone specifically called the Secure Enclave. And the Apple iOS system uses that specifically for storing the fingerprint information. So every time you unlock your iPhone with the fingerprint, it goes into the Secure Enclave, compares the 2 results, and that allows you in if they match. Now, interestingly, most good software token providers out there will actually allow you to make the token present your fingerprint these days, which means that you can have the token system extending into the secure enclave of the phone, making it even more secure.
Yes, and actually, just to point out, Chris, and I'm sure, Naushad, there's one bank, I'm not going to name it, in the past, they were not actually using the secure enclave. So I think Apple does not force you to use the secure enclave. They introduced an app that could do banking in the UK, but they were not using the right secure enclave. So they got caught out, I think, after a few months. I'm not sure if they've changed it. Just be aware, because many banks are allowing you to do 50 or 100 pound transactions just with the fingerprint.
Yeah.
Okay, there's so much more to cover, Naushad, Chris, and many other questions. Vivek, yes, thank you. Passphrase, yes, to many other questions, folks. We are running out of time. I do apologize. I want to quickly do a takeaway from Chris and then from Naushad. When you are buying any FA, we are not selling any particular one, I must stress. Do ask if true FA, do ask if copy protection. Personally, I would stay away from hardware. I'm going to take away Naushad's thunder a little bit and stress Naushad was saying avoid anything that sends SMS only. SMS is definitely not the right way to go. Seed file. Yeah, sorry, go on, Naushad. Yep.
No, go ahead. Sorry. I'm just saying to somebody else.
Yeah, no, so, these are the kind of takeaways. Chris, did you want to add anything to this?
So we're just going to say at the end of this webinar, we are going to send everybody our list of 10 items that we think you should have on your list when you're purchasing or looking to change a 2FA provider. But anyway, bear them in mind. It might just be an educational experience for you. And I would also...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, go on. And I was also going to say I completely agree with the SMS thing. In fact, NIST agrees as well. So NIST has recommended that 2FA tokens not be sent on SMS anymore.
Yeah. If you want me to give you something to take away.
Yes.
Yeah, few seconds we have. Don't start implementing different type of email address for the business name. Don't use your first name and last name at your company name as the email addresses, because this is easy for the hackers to detect you and spearfish you. And when the hackers they want to take an easy life, so that they look for an easy way to penetrate into their systems. So this is if
Naushad,
you have like
Naushad, I'm going to name all my email addresses. Naushad 1, Naushad 2.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, listen.
Because,
I'm sorry to interrupt you and Chris, but Chris, Naushad, thank you very much, and to all the viewers also, and all seeing later on, thank you very much. Please do remember to give us feedback and your questions. Thank you so much,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Have a great day.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.